This week, part 2 of my talk with longtime DC writer Dan Mishkin. In this installment, Dan talks about his work on The Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation into the Kennedy assassination, with artists Ernie Colon and Jerzy Drozd. We examine the factors that led to Marvel's success in the 1960s and compare how Marvel and DC have been run over the years. Dan also talks about his webcomic with Jerzy Drozd, Amazon Academy, and talks about working with the late, great Ernie Colon. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. Deconstructing Comics earns a bit of money from your purchase that helps us keep the show going. We really appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. In last week's show, we began my long talk with comics writer Dan Mishkin with a discussion of his 1980s series Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld. We now pick up the discussion as we moved on to the topic of the Kennedy assassination and Dan's work on the comics analysis of the Warren Commission report. So I got the first 9 issues of that read, and then I also read the Warren Commission book that you did.
Very, very similar projects. Yeah, no, they're not.
Sure. Identical almost.
Yeah.
Just repeating yourself.
Yeah.
No, so what is the exact title? I don't have it in front of me.
So it's the Warren Commission report, a graphic investigation of the Kennedy assassination.
Okay.
It's a little bit unwieldy. It's not where I would have gone, but Abrams Comic Arts wanted to at least echo Ernie's 9/11 report, a graphic adaptation. Mm-hmm. But this wasn't an adaptation because you can't do the Warren report and simply adapt it, because it is a document that really demands that you question and challenge it. Mm. So that's why it's an investigation, not an adaptation.
Right, because I never read the 9/11 one. I know you didn't write that one, but I understood that right. was just sort of a comics version of the
that was
report.
A comics adaptation, and it was tremendously well done. I mean, Ernie did it with Sid Jacobson, who's an old friend who had been his editor at Harvey when Ernie was doing like Richie Rich and Casper and stuff like that. But Ernie, honestly, I found out he was doing that project, but I just happened to call him. What are you up to? He says, I'm doing a comics adaptation of the 9/11 report. And I smacked my head because it was such a good idea. And I hadn't come up with it, and he said he came up with the idea. He was reading the report. He said, it is hard to keep track of all the pieces. But then he said to himself, but that's what comics does for you. Mm-hmm. It gives you visual ways and visual cues that allow you to keep track. It's one of the things that comics does. So he called Sid, and a half hour later, they had a contract for a book, because it was such a good idea. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was an adaptation, and it was. So I don't know what the breakdown of the work was between Sid and Ernie. I have the sense that Ernie was doing more of the breaking down of the story in the 9/11 book than he could do in the Warren Report book, because the Warren Report is not an adaptation. Mm-hmm. So I had to be the one that it was filtered through. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I've been doing this long enough that I know how visual storytelling works, and I came up with good ideas. And sometimes Ernie would. He called me one time. He said, I wanted to go over to the next page in this scene, but Ruth, his wife, Ruth said, well, maybe Dan has a reason that he wants to do it this way. He has it this tight. And I said, look, I always have a reason. It might be a bad reason. You might need to tell me that we have to do it a different way. But please, remember, I always have a reason. So he said, yeah, okay, got that. So then it was a matter of if I sent him, I was doing full script, and if he said it was too tight or too loose or whatever, then he could come to me and I'd say, okay, state the problem, and then I'd figure something out, and I'd say, how about this? And then it would work, At other times, so I've been posting a lot about Ernie on Facebook because of his recent passing. And one of the things I did was there's a panel in the Warren Report book so in the Warren Report book, this is I actually had to, not fight, but I had to convince my editor of that I was going to use word balloons instead of captions because word balloons are so much more integral to the page. And the word balloons weren't going to be what the person was saying in the moment. Mm-hmm. They were going to be what they said to the Warren Commission 9 months later, mm-hmm. or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it worked. She just had to be convinced. Mm-hmm. But in the Ladybird scene, it's from an oral history where she talks about leaving Parkland Hospital and being driven to Love Field, the airport where they're going to go on Air Force One back to Washington after President Kennedy has been declared dead. And she says that she saw that already there were flags flying at half staff. And I wanted to visualize that, but I wasn't about to do what, pretty much every neophyte comic book writer does, try to cram into one panel 2 different points of view. So like, how do I show Mrs. Johnson in the car and the thing she's looking at over here? Mm-hmm. So I said to Ernie, maybe if we're above the flagpole and the down shot and we do I just had some really terrible ideas. But I knew what I wanted to accomplish. So I get the page back. The page has a reasonably close shot on the window of the door where Mrs. Johnson is sitting. We see her through it, and in faded color, we see the reflection of the flagpole that she's looking at back here. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't know if I had tears in my eyes, but I was like, oh, this is why he's Ernie Colon, comic book artist, genius, and I'm just this guy that gets work now and then. It was really brilliant. There's another page where I wanted to portray the 6 seconds during which Oswald was firing his rifle at the motorcade with 6 kind of like stopwatch faces with a clock ticking, a second each one. Mm-hmm. And I would have had them, just down the side of the page, mm-hmm. right? Ernie staggered them, made them grow, showed the rifle scope looking like it was one of the stopwatch faces, like sort of echoing it. Mm-hmm. And it was brilliant. It was just, he breathed comic storytelling. Yeah. It's, he was really, so he did all sorts of stuff like that. Now, sometimes I had good ideas too, because I came up with this idea too close to the anniversary of the assassination, and honestly, absolutely too close to the anniversary of the assassination, was only by doing it, deciding that we could have it come out at the anniversary of the Warren Report, the 50th anniversary, that we managed to get it out on time. But because there was so little time, another artist friend worked on it, Jersey Drozd. And Jersey penciled some pages from my script, or filled out some of Ernie's pencils. Then we made sure that Ernie inked everything, because there's a superficial style. Ernie has unrecognizable inking, superficial inking style. We wanted to have throughout, but so there were pages that that Jersey penciled, and some that he went, oh, you really do know how to do this. The page where Oswald is coming up to, Ruby is coming up to Oswald to shoot him. It's like, so it's one that kind of breaks the rules because it's just a series of horizontal panels stacked, and those don't usually work very well. But I was doing it because I wanted to create a slow motion version of the same scene, the same picture, with just as Oswald is moving out of the frame, Ruby is moving inexorably into it. And so that ends up really coming across. Plus, by using Jack Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission in his dialogue there, it makes it go even slower, because I just put in a lot of his stuff. So, you're always thinking about how you're moving the reader's eye. And sometimes you're doing things that they tell you not to do, like stacking panels or putting in too much dialogue, that are really accomplishing the goal that you want to achieve. So, so at least one of the artists said he thought it was a good idea. So we've got that.
I thought it was an interesting technique in a full-color comic to leave Oswald uncolored. Was that your idea, or what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, that was my idea. That was, and funnily enough, it came out of almost kind of a joke. Because we were talking about the time pressure and what could we not color, but that's not really where this came from. Thinking about coloring, though, I thought about Oswald and the fact that leaving him black and white made a significant statement about that character. He is the mystery at the center of this story. Now, I believe he was the assassin. I think it's hard to get anywhere else. I wrote the book not knowing what I thought, and wrote it without declaring my opinion, because I didn't think that's what I wanted to do in this book. But by the time I was through, it was very much my strong opinion that he was the assassin, but that he was really unknowable. He was a punk and a dipshit and a whatever you want to say about him. He was a creep who got lucky. Somebody who wanted to be a world historical figure and didn't have the smarts to become one, but had the gun that kind of made him one. But we don't know who he is. He's a guy who in the famous photo in the backyard, he has a communist paper and a socialist paper at a time when the communists and socialists would have shot each other on sight, right? The American communists and the American socialists were, so to think that he had a consistent ideology or any, is a nut job. But that doesn't tell you anything more than the other things I've said about him. So making him black and white says, here's what we want you to know. If you start coloring him in, if anybody starts metaphorically coloring him in, they're not being straight with you, because they don't know, because nobody can know, because he is dead and nobody understood him. So that was my idea, and that was what was behind it.
Yeah, and we'll probably really never know why he wanted to kill the president.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very hard to tell. I mean, first of all, it's very likely that he was the person who tried to kill a right-wing retired general a few months earlier. Kennedy was, by today's lights, he was certainly a Cold Warrior, but he was not a right-winger. You know, Kennedy's enemies were, and the people who were leafleting and who were holding signs as the motorcade passed, were the right-wing conspiratorialists, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Oswald, whatever he actually believed, turned himself into a branch of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. You know, so what was he doing? The only thing that I can even get a tentative grasp on is that he wanted to be somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess going back to earlier in our conversation, maybe he didn't read enough comic books. and if he had, he would have figured out a different way of becoming an adult with power in the world. You know, I say that partly in jest, but partly with deep sincerity about what I think comics can do for people.
I was not born yet at the time. I was still a couple years off.
Okay.
And so there were some things that I didn't know about the assassination and the report and so forth. And it had not, since I didn't experience in the present, only kind of looking back on it. I had never realized kind of what would have happened if the report had come out in '64 and been able to point a finger at someone beyond Oswald, like at the Soviets. Then there would have been so much push to go to war.
I mean, you remember the scene in the book where that's how Lyndon Johnson gets Earl Warren to head the commission.
Mm-hmm.
Right, is by telling him that if it comes out that the Russians are behind this, then it's gonna be World War III, and you're a patriot, and you don't want that to be the answer. So it's like, I mean, LBJ, he's a whole other story, but on the one hand, he seemed to believe that Oswald was the assassin, but he later said all sorts of things after his presidency that made it sound like he suspected that there was something else. And in this conversation with Warren, it's like, well, is he just saying that, we think it was this punk who did it, but we need the imprimatur of the Chief Justice of the United States to really make it stick, or all hell will break loose. It's hard to know what he was getting at, and I, of course, I have a lot of criticisms of the report, even though I think that they basically got things right. I think that the biggest mistake they made was trying to act as if they had every fact. And even their junior staff members were saying this, saying better to say this is the best way we can construct all the facts we know. Because once you say absolutely, this is it, everything we're saying is God's honest truth.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a single small fact that turns out to be wrong, you have shot yourself in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what they did, because there were a lot of little facts that they got wrong. They really they really needed to do something more like a truth commission. But that concept wasn't available to these men, all white men, some of them born in the 19th century. It's reading the transcripts of their executive sessions is so interesting at times. Warren is very courtly. He's all this politeness and from other things I've read, he was he's not a bad guy, but he pushed his court when he felt it needed pushing. But in this case, he was as far as the records that we have of the executive sessions, he was just he was practically doing, oh my no, that kind of thing. And it's just and then you had the former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, Alan Dulles, who does not bother to tell his fellow commissioners that the CIA under JFK had been running a series of assassination attempts against Castro. I doesn't think that's worth saying. So so a lot of people take that and they say, okay, so now I'm going to construct the real explanation and the conspiracy and the whatever. But I don't think that there's anything that can be brought up that that doesn't quite jibe with the Warren report, that cannot be explained either by incompetence or ass covering. They were the CIA, the FBI was certainly incompetent. I mean, Hoover, on the day after the assassination, didn't know what he was talking about when he's telling Johnson things. He's got locations wrong. He's got a shootout at so Oswald killed the
cop on the street.
Right, Tippett on the street. And then later Oswald is arrested when he's snuck into a movie theater. But the shoe store salesman has seen him, and I can't remember all the details. Anyhow, the cops come. So now Hoover is telling Johnson that that there was a shootout at the movie theater where Oswald killed a cop. It's like, and Hoover for sure wanted case closed. They've got a guy, he wants him to be it. He does not want any of the incompetence of the FBI to come out. And give the Warren commissioners credit. They recognized that when they got Hoover's first report in December, and they said, this is totally inadequate. We're going to have to do our own investigating. So I really give them props for stepping up when that happened. They were not, even though they must have felt a strong compulsion to cover up, to whitewash, to whatever. By and large, they stepped up and went where the facts led them. Now, I think it was a mistake for Warren to do the questioning of Jackie Kennedy, only him and their lead counsel, and not to have any of the junior counsel take part. And it was a mistake not to publish that testimony. But that was a mistake of courtliness.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand. How do you think it would have been different if those other younger lawyers had been there?
I think that they would have. My impression is they would have asked more specifics about, honestly, the gore, the body parts, the blood, things like that. Because she was, now, as I also say in the book, eyewitnesses are worth nothing. but she was right there, you know, and you know, she might have had something to say. Maybe not, you know, maybe not adding anything, but you know, there were things like it would have been helpful to know, maybe a little helpful to know, that when she climbed onto the back of the limousine, it was because she was grasping for a piece of her husband's skull, which is probably what was going on, but according to other sources. But it would have been good to have her say that, because you know, you sort of want to have as many facts about something like this as you can, and it's just such a bizarre circumstance where the one there's more than one movie camera, you know, home movie camera, but the one that we all know about, the Zapruder film, that had the best angle, that the first impact happens in the split second when the car is behind a sign that's in between Zapruder and the motorcade. It's like, you know, an editor would tell me that that's not acceptable in my story. You know, that's right. You know?
If you were writing a fictional version.
Yeah, right. But that's what happened. And so there's all these, you know, one of the things I say about the bullet trajectory and all of that is that I think people leave out is that you can say everything you want about how unlikely one scenario is or another scenario is. But something did happen. One of those scenarios did happen, you know, and saying that a single bullet that caused, let's see.
Yeah,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because it ended up. Did it end up in his thigh? No, I don't think it ended up in his thigh. So
well, yeah, 5. So it goes in Kennedy's back, out his throat. And then into Connolly.
Through Connolly's lung, back and out the front, and then hits his wrist and fractures his wrist. So there's at least 5 impacts, right, from one bullet. But ask the question, what is the other thing that you're proposing happened? Even to that bullet, right? What happened to that bullet? We don't have any bullet fragment that went somewhere else that we know about. You know, so forget, there were shooters from the front. Okay. You know, there's the question really is, if that bullet goes through Kennedy's upper back and out his throat, where is it going to go next? Well, if you recall that the seats that the Kennedys are in are higher than the one the Connollys are in the next row, and you don't see a bullet hole in the seat back, then actually hitting Connolly next is pretty obviously a likely next step for that bullet. You know, but people like to, well, you saw the book, you know, people show the supposedly pristine bullet, but look at it at another angle and it's pretty mangled, you know.
The one from the stretcher?
Well, yeah, right. That's the, so that's the one like that may have ended up in Connolly's thigh, come out on the stretcher. The stretcher story is a tough one, but again, there's hard to come up with any explanation. But it's not a pristine bullet. Even if it was planted there, it was not a pristine bullet. It was a bullet that had been through some rough and tumble. You know, I actually read, as part of doing this book, strangely enough, I read 2 pieces of fiction. One was Stephen King's 11/22/63, just because I like Stephen King, and I wanted to see what he had to say. And I didn't like gain a lot of knowledge of the scene from it. But there's another book by a guy named Stephen Hunter called The Third Bullet, and he lays out what ends up being a conspiracy theory where Oswald is a patsy, but also a shooter, and has in the CIA, in this case the CIA, but it doesn't matter that it's the CIA. It's like, because this is all about ballistics and physical evidence, and he finds a way to put a second shooter on top of the Dell Tex building, which would have been farther behind. That's Dallas Textiles, not Dallas Textiles, just because people don't usually know that. The Dell Tex building, shooting and firing actually the fatal bullet at the head shot. Mm-hmm. But that was somebody who really knows ballistics and really knows his stuff and worked very, very, very hard to come up with a plausible fictional version of this story that puts in a second shooter. But all the ones that you hear from Mark Lane, from Jim Garrison, from anywhere else, even though when I was 12 years old, 2 years after the assassination, I sure was interested in all of that stuff, and in Mark Lane's rush to judgment, and again, the Warren Commission left themselves open to criticism because of their haughtiness, right? Mm-hmm. Because getting on their high horse. But those explanations don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a number of times how the commission's mission was to kind of lay the dust, to
lay the
kind
dust,
of settle the dust,
right.
Calm everybody down.
There's this political goal of calming the nation down,
mm-hmm. which would seem to work against what you might find in your investigation. That no matter how incendiary what you find might be, you're supposed to calm everybody down.
That's right, and that was the problem, right? Mm-hmm. That's like makes me think of you see the movie 2010, the sequel to 2001.
Okay, I never saw that.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's really good, but Hal's misbehavior in 2001 is explained by having conflicting, irreconcilable orders. I won't say more than that. Okay. It's actually a very good movie. So there's this conflict that they're supposed to settle everything down, but they do kind of want to find the truth. Mm-hmm. And again, they were not men of a time and place where the idea that the way to settle things down is to get through the truth was thinkable, But that's like Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That's what you needed. Now it would have been awfully hard. I mean, I don't doubt it, but what we went through afterward was also hard in many ways. Yeah. Well,
and you made a good point that Kennedy dying made a lot of people feel a loss of hope. I mean, I know my dad was really, really into Kennedy, and still talks about him fondly today.
Yeah. I mean, I was a kid. I was 10. I mean, the scenes in the book of 10-year-old me are really, really my recollections, including my little brother, because we had a teacher conference day that day. My little brother coming out of the house and saying somebody shot the president, and me saying, "That's a terrible thing to say," because I didn't believe it. But yeah, I don't know. You were talking about how old, that how much it affected your dad and hope. And I really, so I spent this time in the book talking about Richard Hofstadter's The Paranoid Style in American Politics, his famous essay later turned into a book. and how, if you look at Hofstadter's understanding of conspiratorial thinking, and particularly the far right that was opposed to Kennedy at the time, that there's this kind of warped mirror image once Kennedy is killed, that you have, my country is being taken away from me, which we see today too, right? Mm-hmm. But my country, my tradition, my everything is being taken away from me. The past that I cling to. For people like me, and people somewhat older than me, there's this opposite thing going on, I think, which is the future that I thought was promised to us has just been snatched away. And that was, so my insight, anyway, into the Kennedy assassination that I didn't see stated elsewhere, but it was, but I think it rings true. And yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine kind of that alternate timeline where the assassination doesn't happen.
Right. Well, National Lampoon in the early 70s managed to imagine it. They had both JFK living and Bobby Kennedy succeeding him as president, and everything in Vietnam happening exactly the same way.
If that had happened, would JFK have been as fondly remembered?
Right. Yeah, that was their dark humor. But hard to say. I mean, one thing that did happen because Kennedy died is that Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And I don't know if John F. Kennedy would have done that in 8 years as president. Not to bash him. I think that Johnson was a different kind of political operator, and he also had Kennedy's death to bank on. Right? He took, this is what our slain president wanted for our country, and turned it into his plan for civil rights. And no taken away from Johnson on civil rights. Whatever difficulties in his speech, sometimes the words that he used, the weekend of the assassination, when he said he's going to push for civil rights, and his aides say that might be too much, and he says basically, then what the hell is a presidency for? So he believed in that, and that I'm really looking forward to the final volume of Robert Caro's biography of LBJ. I don't know if you've read any of them.
I haven't. I'm aware of it, but yeah.
Yeah, but the third, which is about his time as Senate Majority Leader in the 50s, passing a weak civil rights bill, and then the fourth, which is about his vice presidency, and then this year after the Kennedy assassination, are just remarkable for what they show about his commitment, his political skill. Never far from some of the ugliness of his ways of doing things. And I am quite sure that the final volume, when it gets to Vietnam, the heart of Vietnam, will be pretty scathing. But Caro, I think, as low opinion as he has of Johnson sometimes, cannot escape the admiration that he feels for some of what he did. It's very, very interesting. I listened in doing the Warren Report book, I listened to a lot of like White House tapes and things like that, and I got sort of beyond my purview just because they were interesting, as you will do on the internet. I listened to him talking to Richard Russell, who was his mentor in the Senate, who was a dyed-in-the-wool segregationist who opposed him on the civil rights stuff, but was an FDR New Dealer and unquestionably a patriot. He's talking to Russell, and he's basically saying, "Tell me how I can get out of this." Vietnam. He's like, there's no question that Johnson saw the futility of it early on. Mm-hmm. But how does he come out with his own political skin intact, with America's credibility intact, with all of that? And Russell can't do anything but defer to the president and commander-in-chief. And he doesn't give him the out. And I don't think he's trying to, mess with him. Mm-hmm. I think that he's being, I'm a senator, you're the president. This is how things work. Mm. But it's painful to hear, especially if you lived through the Vietnam era. If you were somebody who thought you might be called up and wondered what you would do. Mm-hmm. It's painful to hear Johnson's sense of being trapped, and painful to think of the waste of lives. Yeah. Let's be comical, here for a minute, because we're talking about comic books.
Are you okay for time? I had some other things to ask you.
Yeah. As you can probably tell, I just keep talking.
Yeah. Coming up, what factors led to the rise of Marvel Comics in the 60s? What has been the difference between working at Marvel versus DC over the years? In 2019, can the big two still be called mainstream comics? Also, Dan describes Amazon Academy, his webcomic with Jersey Drozd, and talks about his friend and collaborator on Amethyst, the Warren Commission report, and more, the late great Ernie Colon. First, thanks to all our patrons at patreon.com/deconcomics, more classic episodes of Deconstructing Comics have been unlocked, and I'm releasing them at the rate of one per week in reverse order. This week I'll be republishing episode 90 from August 27, 2007, in which Brandon and I discuss Doctor Strange, The Oath, by Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin. The classic episodes can be found on our Facebook and Twitter feeds by clicking on the earliest months listed on the left sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com, or in publicly available posts on our Patreon page. Check out all our goals and help us reach them at patreon.com/deconcomics. When you watched Batman as a kid, you enjoyed the colorful heroes and villains, the text sound effects on the screen, the thrill of watching a heroic crime fighter escaping from death traps and taking down bad guys. But the show was devised to interest adults, too. What did you miss as a kid? Sexual innuendo.
The penguin's too small for me.
Closeted gay characters.
I like that cape, Batman.
Freudian death traps.
Has the giant clam really swallowed Robin?
Police incompetence.
Bruce Wayne is a millionaire playboy. Hardly a secret identity for Batman.
Whether you're a kid or an adult, there's something to like about our favorite Caped Crusader. Tim and Paul dig for the deeper meanings under the Batmania every other Thursday. What's the podcast's name?
To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles. To the Batpoles.
So I wanted to ask you a few questions about your keynote at the conference.
Yeah, sure.
Because I have a recording of it. I recorded everything I attended there. Uh-huh. So one thing that you were talking about continuity and world building in superhero comics, and you said we could spend hours trying to tease apart the factors that went into the early success of Marvel Comics. And we probably could, but off the top
Yeah.
of your head, can you think of a few factors in that?
Yeah, well, so, I think there's, sorry, I'm sliding along on my chair, which I didn't intend to do. There was this interesting conversation I had before I gave the talk, with Danny Fingeroth. We talked about Danny earlier, right? Yes. Okay. I said, so I was asking about the soap opera element in Marvel Comics.
Yeah.
Says, it just happened that these guys were doing everything in the 50s, right? They were doing Westerns, they were doing romance, they were doing monsters, they were doing, whatever they could do to earn a buck. So a facility with a soap opera romance style of storytelling is, I think, just like one of those factors that you don't really think of as being integral to early Marvel Comics, but it's like it's there. Man, by the time you get to the Submariner in FF number 4, you've got Sue Storm, going back and forth between Reed and Namor, and it's like, and what does that come from? That doesn't come from superhero comics.
Right. Well, and in Amazing Spider-Man, some of that stuff with Betty Brant, some of those pages that were like pure romance comics.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so you have, I think that is probably a big piece of what was on my mind when I was saying that at the conference was that some of this just comes out of romance comics, and that turns into continuity, and then you have and the fact that the stories were being generated in large measure by artists, and that Stan was, we weren't there. I can never know, and I'm not one of the Stan bashers by any means, but as I understand it, the story conferences weren't necessarily very much, right? And so, Jack or Steve or Gene or somebody is just not quite winging it, but they're doing. Yeah, I told you about Keith Giffen saying, "Can I do these 8 pages however I want?" And about how I write very light plots when I'm working with Tom Mandrake. So you have artists who are capable of doing that, and Stan has the skill to string it together, and that's not a mean skill. That is pretty serious. And if he can then take that and say, I'm going to pick up a thread that was in that last issue, and now you're doing a different story about something else, but I can still have a thought balloon that refers back to what happened last time, because it gives us more of that sense of, that we're building on something, and so that you end up with stories like I loved Daredevil. That was the first Marvel comic that I really, really loved, and so you have what was it, the Master Planner stories in Daredevil, so that you have a different story, a different villain every issue, but that there's some Eminence Grise, up at the top or puppeteer pulling the strings. I almost said Eminence Grise pulling the strings, but I realized no, that's just too much splitting my metaphors. So so there's this sense that there's something bigger I think the sense of something bigger comes out of Stan's kind of interstitial connectivity work, right? partly because he's the one who's writing it all, writing the dialogue. Don't want to offend anybody who says that Steve and Jack and Gene and everybody were writing too. Yes, they were writing stories too. But he was the editor and guy who put all the words in. And so making it all consistent just makes sense. It's not because he's looking forward to the day when you can do that in a series of 30 movies and make billions and billions of dollars. It's because it works, it fits. So yeah, there's the skills of those artists. There's Stan's particular place as the fulcrum on which it all rests, and all of their skills that come back from a whole different genres of comic books from 5 or 10 years earlier. That those are just some of the things that that come together. And then of course there's purely economic things, which is like they had to sell their comics through a sister company of National Periodical Publications. So that's
right. So they had a limit on how many they could publish every month, right?
Right. Yeah. There's the fact that Marvel was always quicker, and this got especially true once they could expand in the 70s, but I think it was true in the 60s too. They were very quick to cancel and change and do something new in a way that DC was not. They would certainly in the 70s they'd hop on a fad, and when it was gone, they were gone. They were. I would say that Dazzler came out closer to a time when she was relevant than Vibe did to a time that he was relevant.
Vibe,
the breakdancing DC superhero.
Okay.
Who's now, who a version of him is now on The Flash, and he's a well-done character. But
okay.
On the TV show. But yeah, he's. This was the new JLA from I don't know when, and sometime when comics were being done.
So in the 80s sometime.
Yeah. And they. So Vibe showed up. You had these. They were in Detroit, I think, for a while. I don't know. It was just a completely different thing. But Marvel just Marvel was more nimble, and partly because they had to be, partly because they just were, just because who the people were. DC was stodgy in certain ways, although, as I said, I always loved those characters more. I think because I looked up to them, and because I was, in part, because I looked up to them, and because I was a kid who adored President Kennedy and looked up to heroes, So Marvel was more nimble. Gary Cohn, co-creator of Amethyst, Blue Devil, does good writing on his own. Hard to believe. He said at one time, Marvel Comics looks like a circus, but they're run like a business. And DC looks like a business, but they run like a circus. And for a while that was true, Now, I think that when the sort of the triumvirate of Jeanette Kahn and Paul Levitz and Dick Giordano really started working together really well, it was a great time, and it happened to be the time that I did my most well-known work. I really came to respect the way they pushed at boundaries. They sometimes seemed stodgy and conservative still, but they kept in their incremental way expanding in ways that I think Marvel never did. So you never had a Vertigo equivalent at Marvel, right?
Well, that was Epic, but
I mean that went through my head too. But Epic was in no way an equivalent. It was a way of trying to do creator-owned stuff, and more power to them, right? But Vertigo had a personality. I should say that I'm not a big Vertigo fan. They were not the comics for me for the most part. But Karen Berger, who was my editor on Amethyst, has been my friend now for 30 some odd years, and she did fantastic work turning that into a successful line with a personality and an identity. And we had lunch at a Chicago con one time, Karen and I, and she knew that the Vertigo books weren't really my cup of tea, but she had once said, "Oh, here's a miniseries we're doing. You're really going to love it," and she was absolutely right. So she knew what was up. That was, by the way, that was called My Faith in Frankie, which I can't remember the creative team on, but it was.
I've read some of that.
Yeah, and anyhow, so Karen and I are having lunch, and she says, "Well, so what do you think about Animal Man? Because that's more like a superhero comic." I said, "Well, I'm enjoying it pretty much. It's probably not exactly my superhero story, but it's got interesting stuff, and it keeps me going, and it keeps me engaged. And you know what?" I said to her, "I really like the issue that introduced the new Mirror Master." And she says, "Oh, that's the only one I didn't really care for." so but different strokes. It's like, but it was just very funny to have that play out in our little conversation. So we've walked off the topic of what made Marvel a success.
Well, and I think the shared universe concept must have caught the imagination of a lot of readers too.
Yeah, that wasn't. I don't think that was intentional. I think when it happened, they saw what they had. So that became really important to them. But the other things that I mentioned, I think, are factors, and there's probably a bunch of others.
Yeah, and I hadn't realized. I mean, I was more of a Marvel reader. I hadn't realized that DC before Crisis of Infinite Earths didn't really have so much of a shared universe.
Right. It's funny. Despite what I was saying I don't remember exactly what I said at the Bowling Green conference, so forgive me. But DC did not have it. We who were writing at that time, reading at that time, people of my age, so I was, so by the time Crisis came along, I was 32. But I'd been around comics then for 6 years. And so as a professional, before that as a reader, I felt this sense of the comics growing up and wanting that kind of continuity and all of that. And certainly when we did Blue Devil, we made him such a part of the DC universe that he could never be unstuck again. I mean, he's in the first few issues, we've got Superman, Star Labs, Zatanna, the Elongated Man, and and he lives in Metropolis when he's not doing his Hollywood stuff, So it's like we were, really clutching onto that. However, in my later years, I've come to see how really there's some nice aspects to not being so crazy about continuity. I think I said in my talk that stuff like Bob Haney's Super Sons drove me crazy, except for the Nick Cardy covers. But they were really lovely stories. And if I wasn't so hung up on Superman and Batman aren't married and they don't have kids and they certainly wouldn't be teenagers by now, I would have enjoyed them more. And then you look back at the history. So we were talking about Marvel's history. So what is DC's history? DC's history is different companies that kind of join each other and then or get bought out or whatever. And whole lines of superheroes end up being part of DC, and whether they're exactly in what was then the DC universe or not, it's a little hard to tell. And you've got Shazam, Captain Marvel, and you've got the Charlton characters, which I think has to do with the fact that Dick came over from Charlton, although I'm not entirely sure what went on there. And by the way, that Alan Moore's original Watchmen was the Charlton characters. Yeah. Right? Okay. So just as well that he didn't get to do that. And DC had different shops. They had nobody saying you have to use somebody else's character. No, this is my stuff, right? And that was still going on when I came up first as a professional. And there's actually something to be said for that, because you have sometimes more opportunity for different flavors to come in, for 100 flowers to bloom. Not to be a Maoist communist or anything, but and if 100 flowers bloom because people are not agreeing with each other, you get to see all sorts of cool and different stuff, Might have been harder to do Amethyst in the post-crisis world. Now we, even in Amethyst, we made it connect to the DC universe. We had Amy's father living in the town and her Amy's family living in the town and her father teaching at the university where Dick Grayson was a student. Okay, right. But that was just for a little fun, little something for the people who were really paying attention.
Right. Most of Amethyst was not even in this universe, literally.
Yeah,
it was in
right. And so, and even the town of Hudson, New York, where Dick is going to school, is like, it's not even a real place as far as the DC universe is concerned. Really, it's so yeah. We were in our own place, and that might have been harder to do in a post-crisis world. There was more. Unless we did it in Vertigo, which would not have been the same comic, and there was not a kids version of Vertigo for not only for the reason that the content would be inappropriate, but because we're now at the point where selling comics to young readers, selling monthly comics to young readers, is becoming a virtual impossibility. It's like the direct market is taking hold. The direct market rescues the monthly comic book business and then slowly strangles it. That's pretty much my take.
You said in the keynote that if not for the shared universe concept, probably Marvel and DC wouldn't exist anymore.
I think that's probably true. I think that so many people read for, call it shared universe, call it soap opera, call it I'm invested in this world, and it's got to be a big world. That wouldn't have lasted. I think that if the books had been too atomized, they wouldn't have cohered in a way that people would.
Right. If you read the story and now it's just all over and they're never going to come back to that, then there's not so much investment.
Now, I am now a big fan of stories that start and finish, which is why I love reading, original long form comics. Hate the term graphic novel, so I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
Of it, original long form comics. And I'm, oh goodness, just a second. I set off something on my in Cortana on my computer, but now we're all right. I'm not going to say because that might do it again. So what was I saying? Because I get to have that thing flash on my screen.
We're talking about the continuity keeps the comics all. Oh, but kids won't buy monthly comics.
Oh, right. So I was talking about the long form comics, right? Mm-hmm. That are not the monthly comics, and there's so much great stuff. A lot of it for kids. I founded an organization, a nonprofit called Kids Read Comics. We now every year in Michigan do the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival. It's a totally free event at a public library. We had 6,500 individual attendees this year. We get great people come to it. People that comic book many superhero comic book fans have never heard of, but who actually are selling hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of books. Mm-hmm. There's this. So do you know Rena Telgemeier's work?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah, I know she's huge in kids comics, but she's
right.
And not she's also known to the Marvel DC
memoir,
people.
Which memoir has become a huge category in comics. But Rena has been a guest at our show many times, and I will mention her name to comic book artists who have been working for 30 years. They've never heard of her because they're so divided. So that you have this sense that there's what we do is mainstream comics, but it's not. It's it's backwater. Mm-hmm. It's there's great comics. I read, oh my gosh, what's the French cartoonist? His name is Chaboutier. He has a book called Alone, all black and white, small form factor, but very thick, very many pages. Not a lot of words. It is an absolute masterpiece. It's about somebody living alone in a lighthouse. It's holy cow. And it's great comics, and it's one of the greatest comics I've read in recent years. And it's not something that people who look at monthly comics, and there's still some terrific monthly comics, right? Would even see. I really thought for a long time that DC had the wherewithal to move some of their well-known characters into the bookstore space, which they're finally doing now, right? But I was pleading with them a long time ago. You've got these really well-known characters. Mm-hmm. Just don't do continuity. Do a 150, 200-page comic about Superman or Green Lantern or whatever it is, and then and then be done, and then tell another Superman story, and do a Batman story, do whatever, and do it for young readers, and sell it in bookstores. And if there are comic shops that are smart enough to carry them too, well, fine, they can carry them too. But that's not where you're really going. And I heard a lot of we'll be going. That's the way we're going to be going. That's absolutely right. But it never happened. I used to talk with Dwayne McDuffie about this. I would tear my hair out, and he would say, "Yeah, that's what makes sense." And Dwayne, of course, was doing the animated stuff, as well as comics. So he knew exactly what that audience was and how to talk to them with superhero stories. And if Dwayne and I had had the opportunity to do those kind of stories, it would have been marvelous. It would have been just a lot of, or DCous, I guess, not marvelous. It would have been a lot of fun. We do an annual Kids Comics Award named in Dwayne's memory in our at our show, which I'm really glad we're able to do, but I'm sad that we have to.
Yeah.
So. But comics are going to be around in some form forever.
Speaking of which, I noted from the intro to your keynote speech from April that you were doing a webcomic, Amazon Academy. Now, I guess that's sort of on a hiatus right now.
On a hiatus, yeah, because Jersey Droz, the artist, moved. We both had paying work to do because the webcomic isn't paying work. And then there was the Ann Arbor Comic Arts Festival, which we don't get paid for it, but a lot of there are four of us basically who run that alongside the library people, and Jersey and I do a bunch of the things that you have to keep coming back to, that involve talking with guests and things like that. And so it's just, it's a lot better once we came up with a wiki that explains everything to the guests, but it's still, so, it just takes forever. It really takes forever. And so, Amazon Academy has been kind of idling. We did do the first, the prologue in the first chapter, 24 pages. Anybody who goes to AmazonAcademy.net and signs up for our mailing list will be given the opportunity to get a PDF of that with a new cover, which is cool. And then we're gearing up to start doing new pages, a page a week starting pretty soon. Honestly, I don't even know what month it is, but I'm going to say pretty soon.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just, my daughter had a baby, my son got married, my friend died. It's like it's just a lot to keep up with.
Yeah.
But hopefully, after Labor Day, we'll be more on track because we really like Amazon Academy. It's a story we've been wanting to tell folks.
Yeah, well, for the listeners, explain what it's about.
Okay, so it's basically it's the story of what happens when the Amazons of ancient legend are discovered by the outside world, and for reasons that won't become clear right away, they establish a boarding school in New York City that accepts Amazon girls and American girls to study together. Also, one American boy, because his name is Jordan, and he didn't know it was a girls' school, and the school didn't know that he was not a girl. So But he's a great character, and it's really fun having him in the mix. And I was talking with Jersey just earlier about how one of the interesting things about this story is because he was talking about Jordan's body language and what he's doing with it, and I won't go into detail, but it basically has to do with how confident he is and how confident he needs to become. And I realized we've got a lot of characters who I think is not usual for comics in general, and certainly not usual for my comics. But over the course of 200 pages or whatever, there's going to be a number of characters who are going through significant changes, So it's interesting to see them to see them all move and to orchestrate that. And then there's little things like the one Amazon girl who has been resisting learning English. So her English isn't great, and so to show that at the beginning, I just sort of made her Russian, which she's not, but it's like, so I leave off all the articles. So there's no the and in her, right? And I realized by doing that, I am going to have to slowly improve her speech pattern.
Okay.
So one more damn challenge that I'm setting for myself, but I'll do that. So there's all these things in motion, which is really a lot of fun. But Jersey and I have talked about it for a long time, and we know these characters pretty well, and it's it's really a heartfelt project. And I should say, it started out as an idea for a teenage Wonder Woman, but although they were interested, somebody in editorial who's not there anymore was kind enough to say they're never really going to do this, and that's really helpful to hear. And I understand that they weren't being malicious, right? But she understood that it just wasn't going to happen, because I saw things like Supergirl Cosmic Adventures in the 8th grade by, I can't remember. Oh, I feel so bad. Good people who did it. It was like an 8-issue miniseries that was collected into a book, and it was charming. Which is my absolute highest compliment for a comic book. It was charming and it was delightful, and it was great. And I thought that DC might do more of that, but.
Oh, I looked up the creators, Landry Walker and Eric Jones.
There we go. That's what I couldn't remember. I appreciate that. It was really lovely. You should read it. Any like tween or middle school girl or even some boys, I'm sure, will like it. So I thought that DC might like something similar with an Amazon boarding school where young Wonder Woman is at. But it wasn't going anywhere. And then I sulked for a while. And then I said, oh, well, DC owns Wonder Woman, but they don't own Amazons. Okay, sure, well, I'll just do Amazons. I'll just find my own way of doing Amazons. And then I started playing around with it. And then I discovered that everything that I thought was mythology about the Amazons was actually made up by William Moulton Marston, because there's almost nothing in the Greek sources about Amazons. So whatever you think you know about mythology about the Amazons, except maybe the cutting off the breast, which he didn't use, was Marston. It's so now I have to come up with my own Amazon. So I did that over time, and Jersey and I worked on it, and it's really it's near and dear to me, and we're going to keep working on it, keep putting it out for free. We're also starting to show it around since we have that PDF package to publishers. But if somebody likes it, we may still go ahead and keep working on it online before putting out a book, because that's a way of doing a first draft.
Yeah, I noticed that just like Amethyst, this comic has a flying horse.
Oh right, yeah. But not a flying unicorn.
Right. Yeah. No horn.
Yeah. There's my Wonder Woman. I used Pegasus in Wonder Woman too. So I must have a thing for flying horses.
Okay.
The flying horse shows up in this one when sometimes it's hard when the work is so attenuated. You're just doing it bit by bit by bit by bit, and then you look it over and you say, oh wait, I haven't had an action scene for a while. So that's I needed to front that action scene a little bit, and it's a good scene, and we had such interesting characters. I I would tell you all about them. They all have. Well, so you know our tagline, right? Or maybe it's not on the website. Our tagline for Amazon Academy is "Every girl has secrets," and that's really a lot of what it's about. You know, I was talking before about why superhero stories speak to me, and I think speak to young people. Amazon Academy is a story about figuring out who you can share your secrets with, who you can trust, who's really your friend, why they're being your friend, all of those things, right? All of those things that, to me, are the 10, 11, 12-year-old experience, at least as I remember it. I sometimes joke that I must be stunted at that age, but it's just that it was significant to me. Maybe significant to me partly because of the Kennedy assassination. You know, I was more focused, more attentive to life around me and figuring out what it was about. But yeah, that's what this is about. This is and at the school right now there are. I don't think we actually quite sorted this out. There are basically there's like a class of 6th and 7th graders and a class of 8th and 9th graders, with the idea that the school is going to start kind of expanding over time. But you know, but we know where Amazon. Actually, what's really interesting is we know where it's going. And we're seeing. I talked about a 200 or so page book, but we're actually seeing this as 3 books, like fall semester, spring semester, and then the Summer Olympics at Amazon Academy. And we know where that story is going, but we are also going to discover things along the way, and that's always very nice when that happens.
Okay. Before we wrap up, could you say a little bit about Ernie Cologne? You said that he passed away recently, and I'm not terribly familiar with his work other than having just read Amethyst.
Yeah. Ernie, first of all, he's a wonderful human being. Was a fantastic artist who had like genius skills at figuring out story problems, making them work, finding different ways just brand new ways to present you with narrative visual story, and incredibly versatile. I mean, he was doing Richie Rich, you know, in the 60s, and he did horror and science fiction, and he did, and when I was asked to be one of 4 people to do a possible origin for the Phantom Stranger, I said, well, I know what these other guys are going to do. They're going to do some mystical, religioso, whatever. I'm going to do a science fiction story. So I did a science fiction origin of the Phantom Stranger, which is also a Phantom Stranger story in another way, in the sense that it involves the Phantom Stranger coming to somebody who has a decision to make. That, I think, is a classic kind of Phantom Stranger story. So that's also in my story. But Ernie drew it, and it's like his scenes of really this civilization at the end of time is with like this mechanical rat chewing on an electrical cable in the foreground of one upshot, you know, and it's like he's always letting it out, you know, and then his brilliance of coming up with this whole approach to nonfiction comics when he did the adaptation of the 9/11 report, thinking about how comics work to fix for the reader important information in a way that prose doesn't always manage to do. So going to the Kennedy assassination book, I mean, we kept coming back to the same sound effect at the moment of the rifle shot, so that the reader would be able to say, without even having to articulate it, I know where I am. I'm at this moment again. I'm going to see it from a different perspective, right? So that's something that comics can do very seemingly effortlessly, right? So Ernie did a lot of that. He did timelines. He did ways of connecting things graphically and visually in the 9/11 book, and then these other books. And then when I talked about how Jersey did penciled some of the pages for the Warren Report book, and when he did one, I said, "There's something wrong with this, and I'm not sure what it is." And I'm not like badly drawn. So something that doesn't fit the way Ernie does this. And let me think about it. And it didn't take me long, and I realized, and I checked with Ernie, and yes, this is what he was doing. I think he hadn't really articulated it, but this is what he was doing. He never did down shots or up shots. He always did a kind of I am the camera kind of thing. Even if you were seeing a tall building, you were seeing it as part of somebody who was standing at like person height. You know, and you were like looking up at it. You weren't only showing that. You were showing this as well as the receding pinnacle of the skyscraper, for instance, right? And so he had so many ways and was so versatile in his ability to make these stories happen. It was just remarkable, and always coming up with ideas. He was I'm laughing at something and now I don't remember what it was because it's just some Ernie thing that I can't recall. It's terrible. But let's see. Always coming up with ideas. Yeah. I mean, and always the other thing about him, that's I don't remember what I was going to say a moment ago, but this I definitely want to say. He was always experimenting. He was, when he died, he was 88 years old. He was still drawing. This is the thing I was laughing at, is people would say to him, "Are you still drawing?" He says, "I would draw if they weren't paying me. Yes, I'm still drawing." You know, but he was also experimenting. He was using technology, using software, doing stuff that artists half his age would be scared off by. But he was like, I mean, I know a lot of artists draw on pressure sensitive tablets now, right? But Ernie's been doing it for a very long time. And he said, one time we were trying to put together a party, he and I had several things that didn't actually come off, but he sent me some art for this idea we were talking about, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing because he was just sending me like separate drawings of what would be panels, but they were all on their own. And what I discovered was that he got to the point where he would fit what he wanted to draw into the page at a later step, which is just not the way it's usually done. But it's sort of the way his work developed. Was he said, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this, and so it kind of describes what people do, but when they process it, they don't do it in this order, right? So he was just sending me individual pictures that would ultimately be fit into a page, and he said, you know how it is, Dan. We throw off our constraints and we apply our disciplines. And I said, I really, really love that. First of all, because because constraints is a meaningful word to me, because I had surgery and casts and binding and things like that with my feet, so I'm claustrophobic, and the idea of constraint is one that I wrestle. I do fine in life. Just don't get me wrong, right? But but constraint was one of these words that, really kind of would set me off sometime. And then he says this thing that tells me, you know what? Discipline, the thing that you apply when you are writing comics, that is the same thing, right? Constraint and discipline are just two sides of the same coin. And when you think about comics are all about working within constraint. The size of the page, the limits of the panels, the limited number of words that you can use. So Ernie was really, really insightful, even when he didn't know that he was telling me something incredibly meaningful to me. He was just wonderful. He also once, on another unsold project, I sent him an email. I said, I'm working on this thing. I don't even remember what I said about it, but he sent me back a drawing that could have been the main character of the story I was thinking about without my having said anything to lead him in that direction. So it's like some weird cosmic forces going on. He was a force. He was I really miss him and will miss him.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for all your time today. This has been great.
Yeah, this is like oh my gosh, I just looking at the little timekeeper there, and I see that we've been going on for a while, but I like to talk. I hopefully don't have to get up for anything specific in the morning.
Hopefully. The Warren Commission Report, a graphic investigation into the Kennedy assassination, is published by Abrams Comic Arts. Amazon Academy can be found at amazonacademy.net. Dan is on Twitter at Dan Mishkin. Let us know what you think. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Tweet us at deconcomics. Like our Facebook page or join our active Facebook group. We'd also really appreciate your supporting us with a pledge on Patreon. Our tiers start at just $2 a month. Pledge at least $4 a month to get our Patreon-only series, Spider-Man 1963 and Tim Catches Up with the MCU, where last weekend we published our review of Captain America Civil War. Go to patreon.com/deconcomics to join the fun. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. Do your shopping at deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon so that we get a percentage of the sale. And share our episodes on your social media. We appreciate your support in bringing Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles to a larger audience. Our theme is from bensound.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. Critiquing Comics returns in 2 weeks. You might recall that one topic of last week's republished 2007 episode was Daniel Close's Ghost World. But next week I'll be taking a full episode look at Ghost World, both the book and the movie, with Will Weaver of John Carroll University, who you might recall from our recent episode on The Killing Joke. Will points out that the book and the movie were exactly what they needed to be for each medium, so we discuss the differences and why they're there, as well as answering questions such as, while Enid is clearly the main character in the movie, is she the main character in the book? Is Seymour sleeping with Enid equivalent to something from a Woody Allen film? And could the movie have been done another way without Seymour? So for that discussion, be here next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.